The dust of the high desert tasted of rust and forgotten things. It settled on the transport bus that deposited her at the gates of Alver Air Base, a place where cutting-edge technology screamed through the sky while the land below remained stubbornly ancient. The woman who stepped out was as unassuming as the landscape. Her name on the transfer orders was Alver Vance. She wore simple, functional fatigues without rank or insignia. Her hair was tied back severely, and her face was a study in neutrality. The guards at the gate checked her papers with bored efficiency, their eyes sliding over her as if she were a piece of misplaced administrative equipment. She was just another civilian contractor, a data analyst assigned to a base overflowing with the self-important swagger of test pilots and aeronautical engineers. Her presence in the orientation briefing was a silent one. She sat in the back, a ghost in a room full of sharp uniforms and sharper ambitions. The base commander, Colonel Marcus Thorne, stood at the podium, a man carved from granite and impatience. His voice was a low growl, accustomed to instant obedience. He spoke of the XF-91 Wraith, the bleeding-edge hypersonic test craft that was the base's entire reason for being. It was a project of national importance, a marvel of engineering, and, as his tone subtly conveyed, a source of immense pressure and unending problems. His gaze swept the room, cataloging the pilots, the engineers, the support staff. When his eyes fell on Alara for a fraction of a second, there was no flicker of recognition, only a faint, almost imperceptible tightening of his jaw. She was an anomaly, a line item on a budget he didn't control, and he dismissed her as quickly as he'd noticed her. The official meeting came the next day. Colonel Thorne's office was sparse, dominated by a large window overlooking the main runway. He didn't offer her a seat. He remained standing, leaning against his desk, the transfer orders held loosely between two fingers as if they were contaminated. "Vance," he said, the name sounding like an accusation. "Your file is thin. Data analyst. Sent from command. They didn't see fit to tell me why I need another analyst, especially a civilian one." Inch's skepticism was a palpable force in the room, a wall of institutional arrogance she was expected to bounce off of. "We have a team of the best aeronautical minds in the country out there. We have terabytes of diagnostic data we can't even process fast enough. What exactly do you think you're going to contribute from behind a desk?" Alara's posture didn't change. Her hands remained loosely at her sides. She met his gaze without challenge, but also without deference. "Whatever is required, Colonel." Her voice was low and calm, containing no hint of the offense a lesser person might have taken. It was the answer of a tool, not a colleague. Thorne's lip curled in a half-smirk. It was the response he expected from a bureaucrat. It confirmed his every assumption. "Right. Required. Your office is in the logistics wing, basement level. Stay out of the main hangars. Stay out of my engineer's way. Just analyze." He waved a hand in dismissal, already turning back to the window, his attention returning to the sleek, matte black shape of the Wraith being prepped on the tarmac. Alara gave a short, simple nod that he didn't see. "Yes, sir." She turned and left, the sound of her footsteps swallowed by the thick carpet, her departure as quiet and unremarkable as her arrival. She did not go to the basement office. Instead, she found a discreet observation deck overlooking Hangar 7, the home of the XF-91. For days, she simply watched. She saw the teams of young, brilliant engineers, led by a cocky Lieutenant Jensen, swarm the aircraft with laptops and diagnostic cables. She saw the ground crews, their movements a well-rehearsed ballet of refueling and system checks. She watched the pilots, their confident stride radiating an aura of ownership over the magnificent machine. And she watched the machine itself. The Wraith wasn't just metal and wiring to her. It had a presence, a personality. It was a predator, angry and caged. She listened to the discordant symphony of the base, the whine of turbines, the crackle of radios, the frustrated shouts of the engineers when another test yielded another anomaly. Her focus was absolute, her observation methodical. She wasn't looking at the data on their screens. She was watching their hands, their posture, the way they recoiled when the engine coughed instead of roared. In quieter moments, when she thought no one was looking, her right hand would drift to her left wrist, her thumb absently tracing a shape hidden beneath the cuff of her fatigues. It was a tattoo, rarely seen, a stylized black raven, its wings swept back as if in a dive. In its beak, it didn't hold a branch or a worm, but a single, perfectly rendered gear cog. It was a piece of an old life, a symbol whose meaning was lost to all but a handful of people, most of whom believed her to be long dead. It was a promise she had made to a different kind of machine a long time ago. The pressure began to build on a Tuesday. General Harding, a four-star officer from the Pentagon with the power to kill the entire program, was arriving in 72 hours for a full-power demonstration. But the Wraith's primary engine, a revolutionary hybrid scramjet, refused to cooperate. It would start, sputter, and then choke, its internal turbines screaming in protest before the automated systems shut it down. The diagnostics were a mess of contradictory readings. The fuel flow was optimal, the combustion chamber pressures were within tolerance, the software was patched and repatched. Yet it failed, again and again. Panic began to set in, a quiet, professional panic that was more terrifying than overt fear. Lieutenant Jensen and his team were pale with exhaustion, fueled by caffeine and desperation. They were throwing every solution they had at the problem, but the problem was throwing it all back in their faces. From her perch, Alver remained impassive, but her focus intensified. She wasn't watching the team anymore. Her eyes were fixed on the engine's housing. She could feel its wrongness from across the hangar, a discordant hum that vibrated in her bones, a rhythm that was stuttering when it should have been smooth. While the engineers stared at their screens, frantic for a digital answer to a physical malady, she listened to the silence after the failure. She heard the metallic groans of the cooling housing, the faint hiss of a pressure imbalance. She saw Colonel Thorne on the hangar floor, his face a mask of controlled fury, his presence a heavy weight on his already buckling team. The air was thick with the smell of failure. The breaking point came with a loud bang from the engine, followed by a shower of sparks. Jensen yelled for the fire suppression team. Thorne swore, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. The test was a catastrophic failure. The demonstration was impossible. Careers were about to end. In the midst of the controlled chaos, Alver descended from the observation deck. She walked onto the hangar floor, her steps unhurried and deliberate. She didn't ask for permission. She simply moved toward the silent, smoking aircraft. A security guard moved to intercept her. "Ma'am, you can't be here. This is a restricted area." Jensen, seeing her, snapped, "Get her out of here. We have a real problem. We don't need tourists." Alver ignored them both. Her eyes never left the engine. She walked right up to the massive housing, now ticking as it cooled. Colonel Thorne, about to order her forcibly removed, paused. There was something in her demeanor, a complete lack of fear or hesitation, an absolute, unnerving focus that silenced him. She placed her bare hand flat against the scorched metal casing. Everyone stopped. The engineers stared, bewildered. Placing your hand on a multi-billion-dollar prototype engine after it just tried to explode was not standard procedure. She closed her eyes for a moment, her head tilted slightly. It was an act of communion, not analysis. She was listening. After a long moment, she opened her eyes and turned to the nearest maintenance chief, an old, grizzled master sergeant named Graves. "I need a resonance tuner," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "A harmonic fork. Analog, if you have 1 inch." Jensen laughed, a sharp, hysterical sound. "A what? A tuning fork? Lady, this is a scramjet, not a grand piano. We have oscilloscopes, spectrum analyzers." Alver didn't even look at him. Her gaze remained on Master Sergeant Graves. Graves, a man who had worked on every type of engine for 30 years, looked from the strange, calm woman to the baffled lieutenant and the furious colonel. Something in her certainty cut through the noise. He gave a slow nod. "I think we got an old one in a back crate." From the F, 111 days, he lumbered off. Alver then pointed to a small, insignificant-looking panel near the primary fuel injector. "Open that, Jensen started to argue, but a sharp look from Thorne shut him up. A technician, moving with renewed purpose, quickly unlatched the panel. Inside was a complex knot of wiring and microtubing. Without waiting for the diagnostic tools everyone else relied on, Alver reached in. Her fingers, deft and sure, traced a fuel line to a small, cylindrical regulator. The computer had marked it green. Perfect. Functional. She ignored the computer. Graves returned with a dusty case. Inside, nestled in faded velvet, was a heavy steel tuning fork with a weighted dial at its base. Alver took it. She struck it against the heel of her boot, and it emitted a low, pure hum. She touched its base to the regulator she had been tracing. She leaned in close, her ear almost touching the metal, her eyes closed again. For a full minute, she just listened, her expression unreadable. Then, she took a micro-calibrated wrench from a nearby tray. She gave the regulator a tiny, almost imperceptible turn, a 16th of a rotation, counterclockwise. A collective breath was held. She put the wrench down. "Try it now," she said, stepping back. The perception of Alver Vance shifted not with a bang, but with a hum. Jensen, looking at Thorne for confirmation and receiving a tense nod, hesitantly keyed the ignition sequence from a remote console. The familiar, dreaded whine began. The engineers braced for the inevitable shutdown. But this time it was different. The whine didn't stutter. It deepened, smoothed out, and swelled into a clean, powerful roar, the sound of perfectly controlled combustion. The numbers on the diagnostic screens, which had been a chaotic mess, snapped into alignment, all of them glowing a steady, brilliant green. The Wraith's engine was running perfectly. A stunned silence descended upon Hangar 7, thicker and heavier than the noise it replaced. Lieutenant Jensen stared at his console, then at the engine, then at the quiet woman standing by the wing. His arrogance had evaporated, replaced by sheer, unadulterated disbelief. Master Sergeant Graves looked at Alver, his weathered face etched with a kind of awe. He had seen strange things in his long career, but never anything like this. He'd seen engineers use million-dollar machines to find a problem. He'd just watched a woman find it with a piece of steel and her sense of touch. Colonel Thorne, standing in the control room, felt a cold chill run down his spine. It was the chill of a man realizing his entire worldview had just been proven wrong. He lowered his binoculars and spoke into his comms, his voice tight. "Graves, who in the hell is she?" On the hangar floor, the master sergeant simply shook his head, his eyes still fixed on Alver. "I have no idea, sir." No idea at all. The whispers started then, spreading from the hangar to the barracks, from the mechanics to the pilots. The story of the quiet analyst and the tuning fork became an instant legend, a piece of folklore on a base built of logic and steel. The arrival of General Harding was now an opportunity, not a death sentence. Thorne, his mind reeling, made a decision. He intercepted Alver as she was walking back toward the observation deck. "Vance," he said, the name no longer an accusation but a question. "The general's briefing is in 1 hour. You will be there." It wasn't a request. Alver simply nodded. When she entered the briefing room, the atmosphere was different. The engineers, including a profoundly humbled Lieutenant Jensen, made space for her at the main table. She took a seat, silent as always. General Harding was an imposing figure, a man whose quiet demeanor radiated absolute authority. He listened patiently as Thorne and Jensen presented the data, explaining the previous failures and the subsequent, miraculous success. They couldn't explain the why, only the what. Harding listened, his expression unreadable. When they finished, a heavy silence filled the room. The general looked at the complex charts on the screen, then his eyes scanned the faces at the table. They stopped on Alver. "And you," he said, his voice calm and direct. "The analyst. Colonel Thorne tells me you were the one who corrected the issue. The official report says you recalibrated a harmonic imbalance. What's your assessment?" All eyes turned to her. This was a new trial, one of words, not actions. She didn't use technical jargon. She looked directly at the general. "The engine is like a living thing, sir. It has a rhythm. The diagnostic software was listening for a heartbeat, but it couldn't detect the arrhythmia. The fuel regulator was vibrating at a counter-resonance to the turbine's primary spin-up. A microscopic flaw, but at 30,000 RPMs, it was enough to choke the fuel intake. The computer saw the regulator as open, but the vibration was effectively closing it for a nanosecond. It was breathing wrong, she paused. I just helped it catch its breath. Her explanation was one of elegance and profound simplicity. It displayed a level of intuitive understanding that went far beyond engineering. It was artistry. The room was silent, the force of her quiet competence washing over them. Jensen looked down at his hands, ashamed. Thorne stared at her, finally beginning to grasp the sheer depth of the person he had dismissed. General Harding's gaze sharpened. He leaned forward slightly, a flicker of something ancient and knowing in his eyes. He had seen that kind of intuitive genius before, in places that didn't appear on any map. That's a very specific skill set, Ms. Vance, he said slowly. One you don't typically find in a data analyst. He looked at her for a long, searching moment. Show me your wrist, he commanded, his voice soft but absolute. Alara hesitated for only a second. Then, she calmly pulled back the cuff of her left sleeve. There, on the pale skin of her inner wrist, was the tattoo. The black raven in a dive, the single gear cog in its beak. A gasp came from one of the older aides in the back of the room. General Harding's face broke into a slow, grim smile of recognition. He turned his gaze to the utterly bewildered Colonel Thorne. "Colonel," he said, his voice now filled with a strange reverence. "Do you know what the call sign Corvus means?" Thorne shook his head, speechless. Harding tapped a few commands into the secure datapad in front of him. He angled the screen so Thorne could see it. It was a file so heavily redacted it was mostly black lines. But the name was clear, Alara Vance. And below it a project title, Ethelgard Initiative, her specialty, exotic propulsion and asymmetric engineering. Status, presumed lost in action, Sector Gamma, 7. Thorne read the words, and the blood drained from his face. The Ethelgard Initiative wasn't just a classified project. It was a ghost story, a legend whispered among the highest echelons of Black Ops R&D. They were the innovators, the miracle workers, the people who built the impossible. And Corvus, the Raven, had been their master artisan, the lead designer on the very engine core that powered the XF-91. She hadn't just fixed the engine. She had come to visit her child. She was a legend they thought was dead, hiding in plain sight as a low-level analyst. The woman Thorne had sent to a basement office was one of the most brilliant engineering minds of her generation. The next day, the entire culture of Alver Air Base had been turned on its head. The story of the general's revelation had spread faster than a shockwave. Alara Vance was no longer the odd, silent analyst. She was a myth made flesh. As she walked toward Hangar 7, her path was cleared with a quiet, profound respect. The swaggering pilots, the cocky engineers, the overworked ground crew, they all stopped what they were doing. They watched her pass with a mixture of awe and embarrassment. Lieutenant Jensen stood near the Wraith's cockpit, and when Alara approached, he simply stepped aside, his head bowed slightly in a gesture of deference. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. Colonel Thorne found her standing by the engine, which was now purring on standby, a testament to her touch. He stood beside her for a long moment, the silence thick with all the things he should have known, all the assumptions he had made. "Ms. Vance," he finally said, his voice stripped of all its former arrogance. It was quiet, humbled. "The report on the regulator has been filed, under my name. But we both know who saved this program." He paused, looking at the machine and then at her. "Your expertise is essential here. Any resources you require are yours." It was as close to an apology as a man like Thorne could get. It was an admission of his failure and a recognition of her immense value. As Alara turned to leave the hangar, she passed Master Sergeant Graves. The old mechanic, his hands stained with grease and a lifetime of service, stopped his work. He drew himself up to his full height and rendered a slow, formal salute. It was a gesture of ultimate military respect, offered from one master of a craft to another. Alara stopped, met his gaze, and for the first time, A flicker of something warm crossed her face. She gave him a single, almost imperceptible nod of acknowledgement, a silent acceptance of the respect she had never asked for, but had unequivocally earned. The XF-91 Wraith, now christened Corvus in hushed, unofficial circles, streaked across the desert sky, a black spear leaving a trail of silent thunder. General Harding's demonstration had been a spectacular success, and the future of the program was secure. Alara Vance remained. Though her official title was never changed from data analyst, it didn't need to be. Her authority was no longer written on a piece of paper. It was etched into the institutional memory of the base. She never moved into a fancy office. She stayed in the hangar, a quiet sentinel watching over her creation. In the evenings, after the noise and fury of the day had subsided, she would often stand alone in the vast, empty space. The desert air, cool now, would drift through the open hangar doors. She would approach the Wraith, its engine ticking softly as it cooled, a beast at rest. She'd place her hand on its fuselage, the cold, smooth metal feeling like a familiar skin beneath her palm. It was a silent communion, a shared moment between the creator and the created, both of them ghosts who had found their purpose in the high, lonely desert. The fading light would catch the tattoo on her wrist, the raven, the gear, the symbol of a life she had left behind but could never truly escape. The story of her intervention became the bedrock of a new kind of respect at Alver, a quiet understanding that true strength didn't need to announce itself. It was simply there, waiting for its moment, humming with the steady, powerful rhythm of a perfectly tuned machine.